doing well and having a beautiful, beautiful Sunday. Alhamdulillah, this portion of the program is titled Planning for the Upcoming Year. Alhamdulillah, this is one portion of the program that's part of a much bigger conference called the Student Leadership Conference, organized by MAC, Muslim Association of Canada. Alhamdulillah, I'm glad to be here and take part in this with alongside many speakers, many MSA representatives. So alhamdulillah, I want to say Jazakallah khair for MAC for including me into this. Without further ado, we'll before we break down how we're gonna break down this event, I'll go over a brief land acknowledgement, inshallah, and then we'll break down how we will unfold and help digest this title of planning for the upcoming year. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is a sacred territorial land of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee people. This land is also the territory of the Huron-Wendat Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon, Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Ojibwe and allied nations to peacefully share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. The legacy of this meeting place where people have gathered for 15,000 years should inform our course, especially how we think about anti-oppression and allyship. We want to honor this land's original people, and we invite others to think about the past and the present day realities of these communities, and to holistically question the colonial practices that disrupt connections to families, homes, and our planet. Furthermore, it is vital for different communities in this space to center ideas of responsibility and resilience in our work and be accountable to the treaty relationships we are bound to. So I also want to say this land acknowledgement is definitely not enough. There's a lot of work that we need to do as Muslims and as people who are part of our community to help bridge the differences and unify with our indigenous people. So that concludes the land acknowledgement. And now we'll break down planning for the upcoming year. Alhamdulillah, with me are two guests. First, Fatima, if you could give a little wave. And we have Hanya as well with us. So I'll go over their brief bios. And then basically we'll go through a series of questions to help us unfold and unpack this topic of planning for the upcoming year. Fatima Mohammed is the president of UFT St. George MSA and previously held roles as vice president external, director of outreach, and director of environmental advocacy. Fatima enjoys researching the intersection between faith and the environment and is completing a Bachelor's of Arts in Human Geography and Environmental Studies. She's passionate about policy and activism, and she works with the federal government as a freshwater policy analyst intern for Environment and Climate Change Canada. So, Assalamu alaikum, Fatima, Jazakallah khair for being here with us. Our second guest is Hanya Kaoud. Hanya Kaoud is a political science and global development student at Queen's University, the president of Queen's University MSA, and also is currently the Secretary General of Queen's Model United Nations Invitation Conference and lead organizer at SPHR Queens. She was previously the Community Relations Coordinator at Queen's Female Leadership in Politics, as well as the writer for Queen's International Affairs journal, The Observer. So, assalamu alaikum, Hanya, and thank you for being here with us. So without further ado, actually, before I could approach and jump into our first question, I just want to request everybody, if you're here with us, please do try to turn on your cameras. It's always nice to see some faces and feel that I'm not just communicating directly with the computer screen. So please try to turn on your cameras, inshallah, if you can. So without further ado, we'll jump into our first question. So we have about 10 questions that help us break down this topic of planning for the upcoming year. And we'll share our MSA perspectives and personal perspectives of plans for the upcoming year. And then near the end, in about at the last 20 or 15 minutes, we'll have a Q&A session. So feel free to send and chat, send your questions through the chat, inshallah, and we'll try to address them at the end. Jazakallah khair. So we'll start with the first question, and I'll address this one to Fatima, and then we'll alternate as we go along, inshallah. So Fatima, where do we start when approaching the topic of planning for the upcoming year? And what is the first step you would take when planning for the upcoming year?
Yeah, absolutely. Mr. Rahman, first of all, thank you so much, Shahaab, for moderating, and for Mac for inviting us. I think this is a really beneficial conversation to have, and hopefully we'll hear from the audience as well to bounce ideas off each other for how MSAs are planning for the year. I think approaching the year conceptually and technically are two different ways to approach it. Conceptually, when we think about planning, intentions should always come first. So what is your role in the MSA? And what's the impact that you want to have? I think that's really important to set yourself in the right mindset for approaching the year. And then it leads into technical. So at U of T MSA, we have 19 directorships, and each directorship focuses on its own avenue. So we have religious education or environmental advocacy. And because we have these different pockets, your plan really is based on your pocket. So thinking about who did your role before you, what did you enjoy? What do you think could be improved? We start our planning in July, and actually, year plans and budget plans are due today at 11:59 p.m. So at this point, we've really thought about what is the role that you want to have on your community, what is an impact that you think is missing or should be improved upon, and having that conceptual framework to lead you into the technical, is a really important first step to take. And then the next steps we'll kind of talk about as we get through the event, but intentions and laying those all out on paper and seeing what impact you want to have is how I would approach starting the year.
MashaAllah. I know the U of T MSA is much bigger than other MSAs, so 19 directors is quite a bit, mashallah. But yeah, I definitely want to expand on that point of intention. I mean, in Islam, as we know, one of the most famous ahadith that we have in our faith is that our actions are based on our intentions. So what we tend to achieve and what we want to achieve starts with our intentions first. And so I'll pass it over to Hanya, inshallah, to also address the same question, inshallah. How does planning start from your perspective? What steps do you take for planning for the upcoming year, Hanya?
Just to say thank you for covering the intention aspect. I think that's really important that we start there. As for like the technical aspect, I know every school does it differently, and we kind of talked about this, that U of T is a bigger MSA. So for us at Queens, we're a little bit smaller. So we tend to work in 3 and 6 month intervals, just because we don't like planning for the second semester so early on. We generally have 2 rounds of hiring. This year we're doing 3, and the third one happens in January. So and that's where we have our junior executives, or people who found the MSA later on in the year, or first year students who weren't able to apply last year. Oftentimes they want to join the MSA as executives early on. So we like leaving the second semester kind of for them to take on junior executive roles, such as sisters and brothers events, for them to be able to, get a head start on being members of the MSA. As for when we start planning, or how we start planning, we start with our biggest events like orientations, or the start of year dinner and charity week. And then from there, we fill in the gaps. So we can see like what weeks we can have our sisters and brothers events and socials, as well as any other like fundraising or charity. But because like Charity Week, for example, is an international week where most people follow the same timeline, we start with there so that we can build our schedule around things that we can't really move around, or like in the second semester IEW. So yeah, that's where we start when it comes to technicalities. We turn over in May, but because of Ramadan this year, we kind of started afterwards. And the way I like to do is I just set the expectations for the team and tell them, this is what the goal is for this year, and then leave it up to them to decide based on their schedules, because especially in the summer, everyone has their own stuff going on, and classes, family commitments, and so on. So I just tell them like, hey, by September, this is what we need to have in order to make our lives easier during the school year. And yeah, I trust my team to, abide by these deadlines that we also set amongst ourselves. Like we discuss what time periods work for you, so that it's not just like me giving them deadlines. But yeah, that's how I like to start off the school year.
And I definitely feel like there's a sense of context when it comes, working with a smaller MSA, OCAD MSA, in the past year. Sometimes with smaller MSAs, you have this idea that you almost are forced to reinvent the wheel. And other MSAs have maybe a structure in place. So do you guys feel that there's a solid structure in place, and do you still feel the sense of having some leniency within the programming?
I would say yes, we do have a structure in place. So like I said, the start of year dinner and the orientations and charity week, those are kind of where a structure is. And we keep, all the records of past events so that it's easier for new execs to plan. But I still think that we do have the leniency that the team needs in order to, be innovative and creative. But that doesn't mean we're, like you said, reinventing the wheel every year. And I think both for larger and small MSAs, I don't think that's a necessity. Even larger MSAs can be more productive if they go off of what they already know.
Yeah, definitely. I think, it's always a sense of a stepping stone. So like, you kind of you left off where the last president or the last turnover period ended. And so you kind of step forward and take that and build upon it as best you can. Let's move over to the next question. I know you guys kind of touched on this topic, but it's interesting to see how MSAs are different. So even Queens and UFT MSA, because you guys are both very big MSAs, people would think that you're very similar, but you are also very different. And so I want to ask you both, starting with Sister Hanya, when is your respective MSA turnover period? And when do you begin planning for the upcoming year? I know you kind of answered a portion of it as well already, but if you can expand on that.
So all of the AMS clubs, the Almost Matter Society, so like the student union clubs, we have our turnover period in May. And so for us, I believe we held interviews prior to that, just so that we wouldn't have to delay them until after Ramadan or during summer. Interviews for our new team, I mean. And then more planning, it was honestly based on the portfolios of whatever, executives or directors. So for budgeting, that's something that needs to be done more during the summer. But Sisters and Brothers events can be done in September, because for our first month, we generally have like orientation and more special events. And so that's the portfolio that we work on in the summer, and then Brothers and Sisters can start later on. So I don't think it makes sense for everyone to follow the same schedule. So I keep it relative to the demands of the portfolio. But yeah, around May.
And Fatima, what about UFT? How is that structured?
I think it's so interesting to hear about the different tiers of onboarding, and like the 3 month and the 6 month, and then your junior roles. I'd be interested in hearing more about that. UFT is pretty different. We have our elections in March for our executive positions. At that point, we vote in our new executive team, and our term starts first week of May. At that point, we then interview all of our directors and do outreach for that. We had our training 2 weeks ago, and that's when all of our planning starts. So we plan for the entire year. And planning, like I said, those are all due today. So by this point, we have all of our plans, but then you do still have that flexibility that you were talking about. So the year plans that we're talking about for today are a very broad understanding of sort of what kinds of events do you want to have for the year, what's your plan for the types of impact that you'd like to have. And then we have our actual planning for what the day-to-day logistics of events happen 5 weeks in advance from when you want to have the event. So you have that sort of big MSA desire to have everything set, but then you also have flexibility in, if you know you want something to happen 5 weeks from now, you can submit the event proposal and have some on the ball responding to things that are happening in the world. So slightly different, but yeah, we start in March, and then at this point we've sort of solidified our team and have a broad idea of what our year looks like.
Perfect. Yeah, no, so with OCAD MSA, summer is really the turnover period, but with smaller MSAs, sometimes you don't have elections, which is really interesting. Sometimes it's more of a passover. So, the vice president will take over leadership because, they've already been prepared for the role, and then they'll help fill in the other positions, and whoever's kind of carries over or is still around, then they'll try to fill the existing positions, and then you see whoever's involved With smaller MSAs, I mean, people, always ask, what is a small MSA? I would say the definition of a smaller MSA is an MSA where people have to take more than one role. And so sometimes the president is also the treasurer. Um, and the graphic designer is also communications, for example. And so yes, we do have a similar structure where we're planning from the OCAD from OCAD to MSA. We're planning throughout the summer, but then again, every month we kind of have this check-in where we're like, okay, what specifics about this event do we need to prepare for? And it's not maybe 5 weeks in advance like UFT, but it's very similar as well. So we'll jump to the next question. All these different events, so many different programs, 19 directors, as Sister Fatima was mentioning. Planning itself is a very overwhelming task. So what would you guys suggest, first of all, that's helped yourselves in planning? Because you're working with so many individuals, you have so many events, so many different timetables. You also have school to prepare for and exams, other things like that. So what would you guys suggest? And I'll start with Fatima, to help individuals ease into the process of planning, maybe even for smaller MSAs that don't have the structure in place.
Yeah, I think this is a really good question. And I think whether you come from, regardless of the size of your MSA, sometimes it can be overwhelming to, especially as a student leader, to look at a campus or look at a community and think that there's so many things that we could solve or try to serve, and trying to figure out where the first step is and what needs to be solved now. And so I think looking at establishing what is a need in your community that you can use your platform to solve is something that I keep telling my directors when I was a vice president and now as president. It makes it so that our events have a really important intention underlying everything. So we could have a social and we could have things that are fun, and there's so many, like I could list 15 events that we could host. But when you figure out first what's the need that you're solving, then it makes it so that all those steps have a purpose that it's serving. And what can that look like? For example, a support that you see that is needed now that would help teams in the future. So our team has a lot of templates and forms and things that teams in the past have set up that are so helpful to me now as a president. I've walked into this Google Drive full of all these resources, but that wasn't always there. Somebody had to sit down and think, okay, I hate making a poster every single time someone needs a poster, so let's make a system for it. And so when you figure out what a need is and you can make it so that not only your team is going to benefit, but teams in the future are going to benefit, makes it both for the planning on the internal side and also for events that much more helpful. And inshallah, you get that sadaqah jariyah of making something that's going to help future teams. So that's always something that I like to try to keep in mind, is what's needed and where is your specific role helpful to solve it, even if it's something small, like again, making a template that would be helpful to future teams. At any scale that it happens, when you're using intentions as the baseline, that's so useful. And then also when you're planning events, figuring out how things can be as accessible as possible and appealing to the most good that you possibly can, I think is another crucial thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about what your year looks like in the MSA.
Definitely. I like the point about helping and helping the next group, because it's funny because the MSA is only like a yearly commitment, right? You're committed for that full year in that position. So after that, you can easily just step away and say, my part is done here. But alhamdulillah, if you do have the intention to help the next group cycle in, creating these resources, also sharing them not only with your MSA but other MSAs, I mean that's also added benefit. Sister Hanya, what about you? What would you suggest to help individuals ease into the process of planning?
Similar to Fatima, I would say oftentimes we want to do as much as we can, and we have a bunch of great ideas, but we don't have the resources or the time to do so. So I would ask what is actually needed within your community. And this is something Fatima and I talked about, that we might think that because we were part of the Muslim community or because I've been an exec on this team before, that I know, okay, this is what needs to be changed. But it's extremely important not to neglect the fact that the community's needs might be changing, and that you should always be in contact with the community that you're serving, and find out on an ongoing basis what is needed, both within your team and within the community. So I would say ask yourself what is needed so that you can prioritize based on that. And the second thing is ask, what do you and your team have the capacity and resources to do? And I think this is help for an MSA of any size, but especially for smaller MSAs, whether smaller as in you're serving a smaller community or smaller as in you have a smaller team. We unfortunately can't solve every issue. Like Fatima said, it might be good to keep record of the stuff so that people in the future can use it or build on those ideas. But yeah, it's not productive to try to solve everything, because it will just result in you being able to do or the quality of your work being lower. The other thing is when it comes to capacity and resources for your own team, I think similar to letting them set their own deadlines, it allows them to, have the space to communicate. This is something I can reasonably get done and something I can't. Even it's like if it's an event that is done on a yearly basis and it's extremely significant. Check in with your team. If it's something that can't be done, it just can't be done, and we can learn lessons from it and move on so that in the future it doesn't happen. But yeah, part of not being overwhelmed is planning, but the other part is looking at something realistically and not just what I want to get done.
Yeah, exactly. And I find also, like, as I was the president of OCAD MSA last year, one of the things I'm putting together, or I'm still trying to put together, is a list of ideas I had at the beginning of the year. I found myself personally, and maybe with you guys as well, the enthusiasm at the end of the beginning of the year is always so strong. Like you're like, okay, let's accomplish so much. Let's do this. Let's do that. But sometimes you don't get to those. But instead of letting those ideas die out, what I would advise from my perspective is put them in a list. So like we weren't able to achieve this aspect, or we weren't able to open a second prayer room at this in this building. So maybe the next leadership can carry on that task and work through it. So it's not just kind of let go and it falls to the depths of nothingness, so to say. Let's continue onwards and jump to the next question. So we might have touched on this, some of these points, but what would you consider, Hanya, Sister Hanya, are the three or some of the top most critical or crucial aspects when considering planning for the upcoming year?
I think the best, to just keep it concise, I would summarize it with the two questions I said earlier, is what is actually needed on this campus and within my team, and what do we have the capacity and resources to do? Like you said, we touched on it, so I just don't want to take up too much time, but just
of course. And Fatima, would you add anything else or any other aspects to crucial aspects of planning that for the upcoming year?
Yeah, I think we hit them pretty on the nose. How can you be as most accessible as possible? How can you establish supports that are not going to just help your team, but future teams? And then really being intentional about what's a need that needs to be served and how you can put the most effective plan together to serve it.
Okay, so if I can follow up, I hear needs a lot. And I know this is not a question here, but what needs, how do you guys find the needs, what needs there are in your community, and what's important to address? Because there's so many things around, so many things going on, so many potential collaborations. What needs, how do you find out what needs are most required from your perspective? And we'll start with Fatima.
Sure, yeah, a curveball. I think honestly, being students, sometimes we forget that while we are leaders, we're also just students in the community. And so talking to the people who you're around, talking to your team, talking to students around you, one thing that I think a team a couple of years ago realized is that we have all these people at Jama, and it's, U of T Jamas attract a lot of people, and that's a great opportunity to have, social engagement for people who maybe Jama is the only space that you're attending in the week. You're really busy, but you've made the time to make sure that you're attending Jama on campus. And so they established community where they have tea and cookies and sometimes sandwiches at our two Jama locations. And, we're realizing that there's way more people at Jama than our regular programming. So bring the programming to them at a space where they're already going to be. So, having that space to foster, maybe it's not a Quran circle, but, having the opportunity to bump into other Muslims and talk to them about their day. Oh, what's something cool you learned about in the khutbah? Fostering those spaces in places they already exist was a great way to recognize that maybe we have disproportionate numbers at our events. How can we bring programming to them? So if the need is that there's not enough attendance, figure out where there is attendance and bring it to them. I think that was one good example of how a past team really recognized how we can improve the way that we're already doing something that we're already going to do. We're going to have Juma. So I think that was a good example that I would pat that team on the back.
Alhamdulillah for the previous teams and what they've done. May Allah bless them. Sister Hanya, how do we address the needs of our community?
So I think to find out what the needs are, you have different ways of doing so. We can have formal routes like a feedback form and office hours and asking people. But I think one privilege, I guess, that Queens has is that because the life is centered around the university. There are Muslims who have been in Kingston for generations, whose parents founded Kumsa and their families still live there. And I think they're a great resource to use when it comes to seeing what the ongoing needs within the Queens community and the Kingston community are, as well as they've been able to see, the progression of Kumsa over time, and are able to help us point out things that are missing or things that people might be afraid to bring up bring to my attention, as well as faculty and administration as well. Sometimes you have faculty who are aware of needs amongst graduate students or faculty and students that they're dealing with in a separate area, and having those rates of communications just help you understand a little bit better what you can do to improve. As well as sometimes needs are short-term and sudden, and it requires us to reprioritize. So this summer, for example, it might have been a goal to have socials or events or, like an informative, educative thing during Ramadan for students who were on campus during that time. But then we have issues that come up like, advocacy for Palestine and how that affects students on campus, especially racialized or Muslim students. Or with the London attacks, there were students facing kind of like an echo of discrimination within the Kingston community. And I'm somebody who's been living at my parents' house for the last year and a half, so I don't get to see that. I don't know that. So like Fatima said, keeping yourself accessible for people to bring that up to you. Even though like I saw what happened in London, I didn't see how people were being impacted on campus. So and when it comes to things like this, people might be afraid to bring up that they have doubts or fears or so on, so that they don't look like a Muslim who is afraid or ashamed of their faith. So those needs may seem like they're easy to spot because it's something sudden and very present. But yeah, I think knowing yourself as well, that even though I've been on this team doesn't mean that I see everything, and valuing like an outside view and people who have had the ability to see Kumsa progress over the years.
If I can add,
Definitely. Oh, sorry.
I just want to say, I want to echo what Hanya said about talking to advisors and people who played the role many years ago. I know that I was taking notes during Brother Khaled Fazaz's talk this afternoon, where he talked about the incredible work that my own MSA did 20 years ago. And even if you are in a newer MSA, thinking about what Muslim leaders have done in our community, it's really inspiring. And to think that he was talking about IIW having 400 non-Muslims show up, I was like, when planning IW this year, remember what Brother Khaled said. So I think remembering the like incredible people that we have in our community and the work that they've been able to do. Sometimes we think that the MSA work that we're doing is so unique to this team, but having those reminders of all these generations of young Muslim activists who've done incredible work facing sometimes similar obstacles is really grounding, and I think gives us a lot of perspective. So I definitely echo attending events like this and being in spaces where people who've done the work before you is invaluable.
Definitely, and I want to just secondly echo the 2 points that Hanya mentioned, and you touched on it as well. Connecting to the masjid close by. Not a lot of MSAs do this, and we're surrounded with masajid, and connecting to them, you understand a wider scope of the community, and also connecting to the surrounding community around the campus, like other individuals that have been through similar situations as you, and understand, for example, as you guys were mentioning, the faculty, understand the students' needs sometimes better than us. They've been with the students for 10, 15 years, right? So these two aspects are very crucial. Jumping forward, I know Fatima, you touched on this some this question. How do you consider and make room for collaborations when planning for the upcoming year? whether this is collaborations with clubs on campus or other MSAs from other universities or colleges. How do you consider that and make room for that for when you're planning for the upcoming year? And we'll start with Hanya this time.
Okay, so I think a lot of people approach the idea of collaborations as a form of dawah, at least on my campus, it's how it's been done in the past. However, I think sometimes we have to think who's benefiting from this, especially if it's something where we have to evaluate, like I have to do either this event or this one, I can't do both. So that's generally been KUMSA's approach, just because I know you said we're a bigger MSA, but I consider us to be a little bit smaller because of, although we serve a large community, usually we have a smaller team. So for me, when it comes to collaborations, there's something that I have to say is this a priority. And this year we have an exec whose sole role is to work on outreach and collaboration. So in the past, we've done them in ways where like we collaborate with the International Center on campus because it will help Muslims find KUMSA. Most international students don't know about KUMSA, but they do know about the International Center. So I try to approach it as in, like, I know it's extremely important to collaborate for the purpose of dawah, but I think dawah towards Muslims is, just as, if not more important. And so find collaborations that will benefit your Muslim community first. I know that a lot of people might not agree with that, but I think when you do have to pick and choose which community you're serving, I think the community that gathers because they need a community in the first place is the one that I serve. So for us, we try to keep things like light and fun when it comes to collaborations. If we're working with other cultural or interfaith groups, we do always have to ask the question, am I doing something that I don't want to be held accountable by God for? If your answer to that is yeah, then maybe we don't do that event. A lot of times we're approached to diversity and equity events, but the people attending or the purpose is not something that is in line with our religion, and sometimes we just have to say no to avoid policing how this Muslim speaks on this panel. If it's something where you're compromising on our religion, then we just say no, thank you. Most of the time when we reach out to people to have an event and we set out the guidelines for what works for us, we can avoid that issue. So I try to keep it so that we're the ones reaching out, but any opportunity that I think benefits the Muslim community directly or benefits the name of the Muslim community, we try to take it. But again, keeping in mind that we can't say yes to every opportunity.
And Fatima, what about you? How do you guys deal with collaborations when you're planning?
Mm-hmm. I think Hanya touched on really important points about where we need to be careful about where the line is for collaboration. I think you summarized it really well, thinking about what is the need, obviously, and then if this is going to be something that is net positive, or is this something that's going to benefit the community, is so important to keep in mind. I think this year, in the pandemic year specifically, thinking about how many collaborations were able to be pulled off and were really sparked by being online and needing to reach out and have these supports in place was really, really inspiring. And I hope that continues forward into hopefully when we're in person. And Hanya and I have talked about this before, but when you recognize that there's so much happening in the community and you want to serve everything, collaborations become really helpful. I think Mac does a good job at this, at reaching out to so many different groups and having all of those networks serving one purpose, but being strategic about it. And so recognizing that, RAS has a great platform that they use for a specific purpose, and Mac has a great perspective that they bring, and ISNA has a different audience. And so alhamdulillah, we're at a point in the Muslim community where there's no shortage of, I want to do something, where should I go? And if MSAs can be a space where you can have those collaborations, bring them together and see how those different audiences are targeting different things, that's really exciting to me. So yeah, being careful, making sure you know what audiences are being talked to about what. There's a lot of great potential there, and I hope that we can see just how many collaborations happen this year carry forward. Yeah, lots of exciting potential there.
And definitely with smaller MSAs, whenever we have the opportunity to collaborate, it gives us the ability to contribute when we don't have to commit to as much or commit as much time to. So it's always collaborations help a lot in that sense. But echoing your point, there's a lot of Muslim organizations that MSAs have collaborated with, whether it's NCCM, Penny Appeal, and many of these other organizations. Alhamdulillah, COVID. We have a question for COVID, which is coming up, but COVID has helped a lot with increasing our online presence, and how that's also helped us come together as different MSAs and collaborate with other groups. So one of the hot topics is financing and budgeting for the year, because it's always an interesting topic, a difficult topic sometimes to discuss. So what are some tips you guys would both suggest when approaching the topic of finances? And we'll start with Hanya. I think Fatima. Sorry, Fatima this time. I keep on losing track.
Okay. Yeah, finances at U of T. I know this is another thing that differs very greatly between MSAs, specifically where the money comes from. And I think it has different implications based on where that does come from. So at U of T, our funding comes primarily from our student union, and that comes from our student fees. And so with that comes consideration. So for example, knowing that all of our events are funded by the money of us, the student body, there's an amana, like a responsibility that comes with making sure that you're being very responsible with where this money is going, regardless of where it comes from. If your money comes from sponsorships or from Muslim community or from student fees, remembering that amana is really important, because if you could do something cheaper in the same effective manner, I think that's something that a lot of Muslim community organizations deal with. The way that we have it at U of T is we have all of our budgeting proposals in at the beginning of the year. So again, due tonight. And that's like an overview of what you think your year will look like. Every opportunity to, again, have those connections with other organizations, the opportunity to sponsor an event is always a good idea. But I think bringing back, my biggest tip would be to think about where resources that already exist, how can you be the most strategic in putting money towards things that are going to be beneficial, and perhaps things that are going to benefit future teams. Again, putting in place resources that have long-term benefit as opposed to just a short-term benefit. Also, COVID changed the way that we understand funding, because a Zoom event is much more budget friendly than a nice event decked out with all the snacks. But it's going to be interesting seeing how, when we go back in person, how can we be sustainable? How can we be frugal, but also serve the community in a way that's fun and accessible? Is always interesting. I'm interested to hear about what Hanya's perspective is on ticketing, because I think that's different at every MSA. We have tickets for our large events, but not our small events. And so that was a lot, but basically understanding where your money is coming from, the amana of where it's coming from, and how can you serve the community in the best way possible.
And Sister Hanya, what about your tips for finances and budgeting?
So unfortunately, we don't get a lot of money from our student union. The process is kind of different. We have to apply for, this voting thing where the entire student body votes on whether they're okay paying a fee that goes directly to CUMSA. So in the past years, that's either just been ignored or it just hasn't passed. And it's only done, I think, like every 2 years. So most of our funding is either grants or we fundraise ourselves. And I think COVID gave us an opportunity to be creative when it comes to fundraising, because there's a lot of ways that we can do online fundraising. But the only, downside of it is I think we've seen like a decreased engagement during COVID. And so, and everyone's finances have been different. So there hasn't been a lot of, I think having online events and online fundraising is a bit of untapped potential. Other than that, when it comes to budgeting, like Fatima said, budget requests, and then from there we talk to our team about what is a reasonable amount of money to give and what we should change. We do ticket at events where generally anything where there's a significant amount of food, we charge people for that. But we do have bursaries provided through the university and different equity offices for when we want people to attend events, but we understand that money might be a barrier. We have them apply for the bursary either through us or directly to the body offering that, so that people can still come to the events and not pay. And it's something where like people on the team don't have to know who it is, because I know that can be a barrier when applying for bursaries, because often the Muslim community is close-knit and people don't really want to share that. But yeah, generally because our money is, we don't have like a stable flow of money. Every year it's different. But yeah, we try to make our events, as cost efficient as possible. And when we can pay for things, like a couple of years ago, we had a paint night where I'm not going to say we use cheap materials, but we just tried to keep things budget friendly. We're all students. And so, yeah, so when you can make something affordable, make it affordable. And if people have to pay, use the resources that the university has, like bursaries and grants. Yeah, that's all.
Definitely. I think the idea of inclusivity is very crucial, and making sure that no matter what the obstacles and finances for anyone, everybody should be able to participate in events, no matter what they're able to contribute. One of the things, actually, interesting things we came across, OCAD University actually came up with a TV channel for the past year. So it was called OCAD U Live. And and then we had the MSA show, which was part of OCAD U Live. And every show we produced, whether it was like henna or different things or introduction videos, things like that, we were paid a certain amount. So alhamdulillah, I mean, there's always opportunities that come your way, and if you're involved with the student union on campus, you'll find these interesting ways to make money. Of course, we're an art school, so we contribute in very creative ways, but there's always opportunities around. Moving on to the next question, Hanya touched on this a little bit, the idea of inclusivity. So how does your respective MSA approach the idea of inclusivity when planning events? For example, planning events for people who are more keen on coming for social events rather than religious-based events, or people from different ethnic backgrounds that aren't represented, or minorities. So Fatima, we'll start with you on this one. So how do you approach the idea of inclusivity when planning events?
Yeah, I think this is a really big one. I think all MSAs face that balance of where do we have, religious focused events and social events? Should you have both? Should you have one or more of one or the other? And understanding, I think, at the core of it, that MSAs are to provide a community for people to feel welcome and to feel accepted. University is a big, scary place sometimes. And so having an MSA that only appeals to a certain kind of Muslim doesn't benefit the whole community. And so recognizing how can your event serve the most people possible and create spaces where we recognize that we're all striving. We talked about this yesterday in the troubleshooting session, but there's a standard of what we'd like to strive towards as Muslims, but that we're not all there, and that we're all approaching it from different perspectives. And that if the MSA can recognize that we want to be at a certain place and that we're all in this position of growth as students and as young Muslims, and we're trying to get to the same, standard of what we want, what we think would be good as a Muslim. When we recognize that not everyone's there, and we have programming that appeals to people who can be comfortable at the social event and can be comfortable at the religious event, there's no hard and fast rule about what that balance looks like. And it looks different based on the culture on your campus and the people that are running your team. But remembering that it's a place for people to feel accepted. We're not here to tell people what is the right way to be a Muslim. We're here to understand how we can all strive in our own personal journey towards being the best Muslims that we can possibly be. Yeah, definitely a less technical answer than any of the other questions because it looks so different on every campus. But understanding what that balance looks like, and always keeping in mind the intention that we want to serve and help as many Muslims as possible. And that not every event is for everybody. And that's perfectly okay. As long as you're transparent about what kind of events are happening, and that if I'd like to attend this event, I can. And if I don't have to. I think that's crucial and sometimes gets forgotten.
And you never know what impact you have on somebody, whether it's through an event or through letting them open up and join in to an event. So you never know what impact you have on somebody. So being inclusive never has any drawbacks, definitely. And Hani, I'll pass it on to you. How do you guys approach the idea of inclusivity in your MSA when planning for events?
So similar to what Fatima said, I think this goes back to asking, like, what is the primary purpose of the MSA? Why am I part of the MSA? Why was the MSA founded in the first place? And like Fatima, I would say it's because people want a community, especially, like, I mean, we have this one faculty member who always says, like, this is your home away from home. I'm your parents when you're not near your parents. And so I think if that's the goal when it comes to the MSA, how can I do a better job at making everyone feel included? Dawah towards Muslims isn't always about teaching them about the religion. Sometimes it's just, you know, inviting them to the mosque, making sure that they know that they can go there, even if they don't wear hijab or are struggling with their religion. And I think oftentimes we, you know, if you don't experience it, you don't know the difficulty of being in an environment where nobody looks like you, or where there aren't many hijabis, or when you're asked on a daily basis about why you dress like this or why Muslims do this and that. And that has been the experience at Queen's for a lot of Muslims. And so I really can't blame anyone for, you know, if they take a step back from their religion or don't attend the mosque or feel judged by the MSA. I mean, it's completely understandable. So I think one thing that I can do to help with that is just make it so that people take the first step by coming to the masjid or by coming to the MSA, by surrounding themselves by Muslims. I don't want to underestimate the impact that that has on people in the long term. And so, yeah, the other thing I would say is when it comes to inclusivity is I'm not going to have all the answers. I'm of a certain background. I have a certain upbringing. I'm not going to be able to tell or to, you know, like help make every race feel included. So it's important for me to reach out to those who have more experiences or can give more advice. So for us, sometimes that's the International Center, the Queen's University International Center, or other cultural clubs like the South Asian Students Association on campus. So something that we did last year was a collaboration with the Queen's International Center, where people made kunafa, and most people there were not Middle Eastern, but it was something that was enjoyable for them and it allowed them to learn more about a different culture. So having more events like that where it's kind of casual, where there is less pressure on what you have to learn, also knowing that, you know, like we say, what is it? Honoring people or where they're at. So it's okay if you're still learning about other cultures. I mean, I'm not saying we excuse racism or anything, but if you don't know somebody's cuisine, that's okay. That's something that we can learn together. The other thing I would say is that although those events are enjoyed by people, we do, again, have to prioritize what we can do on campus. Although the Muslim community may seem large on campus, if we divide based on our race and sect, it becomes a lot smaller. And so if we're consistently holding events that appeal to different cultural demographics, sometimes you'll find that only that culture attends those events, and it splits up our efforts and splits up the Muslim community, not in like a divisive way, but it just doesn't bring us together to me. And we can't host, you know, something every week. So we want to just make it so that we can gather as a community as much as possible. So while yes, we should appeal to different demographics, how we do that is also important. I would say if your goal is to make the environment comfortable for everyone of every cultural demographic, that is important, but to host a cultural event for every demographic, that does not make sense regarding like time and capacity. And yeah, the other thing I would say is reach out to people already doing the same work so you can collaborate, so that you're not doing, you know, the same work over and over.
Definitely. No, that point about the food did touch home for me. But also, you know, potlucks, I feel, as events, generally speaking, aside from the point, are such rich events because everybody brings their own food, and then you get to try different foods. And also, yeah, the point about really joining and unifying communities instead of separating them, I think that's the biggest and most important point of inclusivity. So moving on, what challenges do you face when planning for the upcoming year in your respective MSAs? And we'll start with Fatima.
Sure. I think I mean, if I had to think of challenges, I think what we talked about in the beginning, especially, were not figuring out how to not tackle everything. That's something that I, every year in the MSA, I've had very specific roles. My first year, I was environmental advocacy. I had to keep reminding myself that environment is my focus, but there are other things and other people are serving them as Muslim student leaders. And I think as just students in general, there's so many opportunities that come our way. And it's easy to approach burnout from an academic burnout or social burnout or community work burnout. And so I think understanding and seeing the work that other people are doing and how you can support them is the best way to tackle that challenge, figuring out what is your role and how can I use this position and the experiences that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me in the most beneficial way possible, and keeping in my lane, so to say. We can support other people and we can figure out where you're most effective. I would say is the biggest challenge that I faced from an MSA perspective. Yeah, I'll let Hanya go and then maybe I'll have more to say, but I would say that's the most consistent thing, figuring out what your role is and how you're most effective without approaching burnout.
Definitely. I will say this one, I'm kind of hesitant to say, but if we're just being honest, when we spend a lot of money and then we're in a deficit for this event, that sucks. You know, that's just something I want to avoid at every event. And I know it's a little superficial, but if we're being realistic, that is something that we should be concerned about. The other one I would say is that although a low turnout doesn't bother me, if 5 people come to the event and benefit from it, that is great. Even if we put in like weeks of planning and advertising, that's totally fine with me. The only, downside to that is it's not that it bothers me that people don't show up or it bothers me that they're missing out. I know that my university experience has significantly changed since finding the MSA. And I just want people to have the opportunity to be part of a community. Especially, like I said, on a campus where you might feel isolated because of your race or religion. I think people might be missing out on the experience of having friends who are your friends solely because, you gather for the sake of Allah. So I just wish more people knew about the MSA or felt comfortable joining, or that we could keep consistent attendance regardless of, how you practice and so on. So yeah, that's the only thing. I just want everyone to benefit as much as possible from the MSA.
Yeah, I wish, it's the perfect scenario where all the Muslims on campus would just join the MSA, but unfortunately that's not the case. I also wanted to say, from a smaller MSA perspective, one of the things we struggle with and challenges is outreach and making sure everybody on campus knows about our club. Because sometimes, whether it's we're online or we're not on campus, or people don't see our social media posts or posters and things like that. People don't hear about the MSA sometimes, and so it's always you come across a Muslim and then you find out that they haven't heard about the MSA or they don't know about the prayer room. And it's like, wait, where have you been all for so long? But that is our duty, and it means that we do have to do a little bit more work. But it's always tough, and it's always a struggle. Moving forward, I know we touched on the pandemic a little bit. So one of the things that we all came across was the shift to online, everything being online during the pandemic. So I want to ask Hanya first, and then Sister Fatima, how did the pandemic change your approach, or will change your approach to programming and event planning? And how will that change in the future? Will it be a mix of online and in person, or how do you think, being through a pandemic and now, inshallah, seeing the other side, the light at the end of the tunnel, how do you feel that your programming and event planning will change because of the pandemic?
So a more technical thing for us because of the pandemic, people were significantly less engaged with all student clubs, not just KUMSA or the MSA. So I think that made us work harder when it came to advertising and marketing. And it's something that I try to see it as a positive. I think if we maintain the way marketing has been done over the last year and use it for in person, I think it could allow us to have, like you said, better outreach on campus. The other thing I will say is going back to in person, I think one of the challenges that we had before is that everyone has a different life and schedule. Some people are local and live with their family, so they only attend school during school hours and then they go home. And then there are people who live in Kingston full time, or people who travel for Thanksgiving or on weekends and so on. And that made it a little bit difficult to get everyone in the same room or at the same event. And I think we talked about this yesterday a little bit, but there's a lot that we can learn from online events, and we can use it to our advantage. And so I hope that, maybe our year start dinner can be online so that we can gather as many people as possible and let them know about the musalla and let them know about our events. And then we can do more in-person events, but, just to make sure that we reach as large of an audience as possible. The other thing I will say is that, again, this is another more technical thing, but issues like regarding sustainability versus environmental sustainability versus saving money and hygiene. So again, very superficial, but Kumsal a while ago invested in plastic or glass plates for our events so that we don't have to spend money and waste paper plates and throw things out. But since the pandemic, a lot of people have become less comfortable eating in restaurants or using their cutlery or so on. So what is one way that we can get around that, or get around people's, I'm sure in first semester, not everyone might be comfortable attending an event where we're not wearing masks or where there's food. So that might be a little bit difficult to navigate, especially in the first year. But I think that we can look towards other communities and what they do. So there was this one Solidarity with Palestinian Human Rights event that I attended where, they had a lecture and then they told everyone, bring your own plates and cutlery. So that kind of like solves the hygiene issue and solves the, wait, no, you're saying, okay, I want to hear why Mustafa is shaking his head regarding that, but that's something that I thought was like a little bit innovative, where it solves like two issues that we didn't see before. So I'm hoping that although we learned lessons from the pandemic, there's still a lot more to learn and reflect on. And I think learning from other communities and how they dealt with the pandemic is important. And yeah, inshallah khair, because that's all I can say. I don't know when the musallas are going to open. I don't know when we're going to get back to in-person events. So yeah, I hope we use the lessons we learned, but also inshallah khair, it's not over yet. So
yeah, I think Hanya brought up really important points, especially thinking about what people's comfort level will be with things like reusable cutlery. That's an interesting consideration. What are people's comfort levels with like outdoor events? And then what happens in the wintertime when things have to go indoors? That's going to be an interesting space to navigate. I think definitely a positive that everybody has talked about with the pandemic is all the collaboration opportunities. We've brought in speakers from the UK and from the US that would never have even been an option. We've talked about funding being tight, certainly not in a position to spend thousands of dollars flying speakers in. And so having the opportunity to have them on Zoom was quite revolutionary. And I hope transfers into the online space, the in-person space. Also thinking about our health and safety amana and responsibility to the community. Like when we were talking about opening up Jama again, weighing like it's possible, but we can only have 12 people, whereas U of T MSA serves hundreds of people every Friday. And what that balance is going to look like is going to be really interesting. The university at U of T hasn't left a ton of information about room capacity and all the technical things that come with the pandemic. And so I wonder what that will look like, making sure that as a team, we're really sure about the I guess, language that we use when talking about the pandemic so that people feel safe and they don't feel like we're just haphazardly jumping back into planning, I think is going to be really important. If I was a student and I saw that the MSA was hosting really irresponsible COVID planning, I would probably just write them off for the rest of the year and be like, I would rather, be safe. So I think starting the year in a really sure way of having health and safety as an important other amana, other than serving religious responsibilities, is going to be an interesting space that's going to constantly evolve, but that as all of us as MSA leaders will have to have as an additional consideration for sure.
Definitely. And I think, it is a tough question, but you guys both did so much justice to the answer in your answer. It is tough because there's so many things that are still up in the air. We don't know. Like OCAD University, we're trying to shift into in person, but it's difficult. It's a step-by-step process. So, for the time being, the OCAD MSA is not really looking into in-person events yet. But then, when we do approach that, it's hard to kind of forecast how things will be in the future. And so now we're approaching our last but not least question. And it is 4 o'clock, so we're right on time. And I feel like this is the most crucial question. How's and we'll start with Sister Hanya. How is being involved in the MSA transformed how you prepare and plan for your personal and professional goals? And what is the biggest impact that the MSA had on you as a person?
Okay, so I will say, I have been in this role for only 3 months, but I have been part of the MSA for longer. So, and I do think that just this role in 3 months has taught me a lot. In the past, I felt that I had more capacity to do more events and volunteer for things that were outside of my portfolio. But since having this role, I feel that I have to take a step back and say, no, this is enough. And that has been very difficult. I don't like saying no, especially when it's something that I know that is needed in our community. And so I talked to Fatima about this, but when we had the London attacks, we hosted a community care session for Muslims, and we had faculty as well as like a cultural advisor, and like we had supports for the community, and this is something that we kept open to all Queen's students and faculty and Kingston community members. And yeah, it took time and consultations to organize. It was not just something that we threw together or something where we hosted. Ultimately, people just came and talked about how they felt, but it was not something where we were just like, okay, yeah, let's put people in a room and see what happens. So it took time and care to organize, and it was organized very quickly. So yeah, and then I had somebody reach out to us, and they said they wanted to organize a similar session, but they were not Muslim, and so they didn't want to do it themselves because they didn't want it to come off as condescending or so they reached out and asked for help, and it took me like 3 weeks to say, okay, I'm sorry, but this is the most of my time and the most work that I can do to help you organize this. And that was difficult because I knew it was directed at Muslims, and I didn't want to say no to a non-Muslim trying to help Muslims, but the girl took it really well. She was like, of course, I understand this is your capacity, but being able to say no was difficult. And this has also translated into my personal life as well. I don't know if I would say personal or professional, but there are lots of times when I want to help my community, or if somebody asks me for a favor, I want to say yes, but if I can't, I can't. And that's something that I am still learning. But yeah, that one experience made me more comfortable assessing what actually can be done. Yeah, as for the biggest impact the MSA has had on me as a person, I think I have had to learn to be more patient, and think more before I speak. I sometimes people ask you for unreasonable things, and I don't want to tell them they're being unreasonable, but that is something, where like I have to hold my tongue, and sometimes you have to, I don't want to say placate people, but you have to make sure people feel heard and comfortable, and eventually let them know that this is not something that we can do, but also, find the appropriate resources and redirect them and so on. But yeah, I just feel that I've had to become a calmer person in general, and that's a good thing in my opinion. But yeah, I mean, I'm still a work in progress, so I wouldn't say that this MSA has transformed me or anything. But these are a few traits that I hope are a benefit or a good thing.
Definitely, I think working alongside people is always the toughest task because you deal with all different types of people, whether it's the tough people that are very direct and aggressive, or whether it's the soft and kind-hearted people. So being patient, I feel like I do resonate with that as well. Is you see all different aspects of people, people in their most stressed situations, and so being calm and composed is always important, and being soft and kind to people, because no matter how they approach you, when you approach them with a sense of kindness, that always kind of de-escalates the situation. Fatima, what about you? How do you feel that the MSA has transformed how you prepare and plan for events or goals? Sorry, and what is the biggest impact the MSA had on you as a person?
Yeah, I agree with Hanya. Definitely a work in progress. And 3 months into our president roles, I think we can check back in at the end of the year and see how these answers change, because definitely lots are constantly evolving. Dr. Jasser and Sister Nimau today in their session this afternoon talked about how in leadership roles you have to be developing your own faith, and that being confident and comfortable in your own religion is so crucial as a first step to understanding how to lead a team. And so we talked about this in the brainstorming session. Yet I think I just plug at MAC events at every single time I speak. I'm just now realizing. But we talked about how when you're an MSA president or an exec, you're an MSA president or exec all the time, and that it should inform the way that you interact with everybody, because not only like from like a MNA perspective that you're representing the MSA. And I talked about this, how it presents a really great opportunity for growth, because when you think about, I'm representing the MSA all the time. As Muslims, as a Muslim wearing hijab, I'm representing Islam all the time anyways. And so if my MSA leadership position enables me to be a better Muslim through the avenue of serving the MSA, it's also through the avenue of growing closer to my deen, inshallah. So I think, yeah, spiritually, there's a huge opportunity for growth through MSA. And then professionally, I know the way I work, and I know that I take on a lot of projects because I just rely on me. But then as an MSA president, recognizing that when you're leading a team, there's a very different way to conduct yourself. And like Hanya said, being patient with people. I think the opportunity to lead a team and work with groups and develop diplomacy are huge things that MSA, I've had other leadership positions, but MSA is very unique in the ability that you wear like 7 hats at once, and you have to figure out how to balance them and to be an effective leader in all of them. And so spiritually, there's a growth. And I think professionally, there's also growth. And maybe there will be more that, who knows, we'll come across after being presidents for more than 3 months. But yeah, that's probably the big things that come to mind about growth through MSA.
I'm sorry, I just want to say really quickly also, because I think this is probably the more important thing to mention, but I do think that since being part of the MSA, it has made me prouder to be Muslim, and it has grown my desire to be, to maintain like my involvement in the Muslim community. I think seeing how other people have contributed to either the MSA in the past or the Muslim community or the Kingston community has like instilled a sense of pride in me, because when we do things like Charity Week, like, okay, it's great, we're doing charity, but it also allows me to reflect on the fact that we do this because this is something that is integral to our religion. So anything good that comes out of the MSA, it's just great to look and think like, hey, this is exactly what my religion preaches. We're not just doing this because it's a good thing to do. Other clubs can do charity or, so on. So yeah, just being a better Muslim, like Fatima said, and improving yourself, but also being more proud of your religion and seeing the impact that has on other people as well is crazy.
I agree. That's a big one.
Definitely. Wow. Very, very good answers. Very interesting. And that does take us to the end of our session. But we do have some questions in the chat, and I want to encourage people to keep on asking questions so we can jump right into those now. And whoever would like to go ahead and answer these, please do so. So the first question here we have is, how do you decide whether to make an event on a weekly basis or not? There's a risk of having an event. Is there a risk of having an event weekly to find attendance diminishing every week? So whoever would like to answer that, go ahead. Weekly events.
Yeah, I would say thinking about the format of events depends on what the purpose that you're trying to achieve with them is. And so, we have Islam Awareness Week and Charity Week for us are 5 days of like concentrated programming. And so each day looks very different from like a 1-day speaker panel. And so thinking about what we said in the beginning about what's the need that you're trying to serve. So if the need that you're trying to serve is establishing a closer connection with fiqh or Islamic knowledge, then perhaps having a more sustained event that takes place where people can go home, read about it, think about it, come back and talk to people and ask and answer questions, then maybe a weekly type of consistency makes sense for you. A fundraiser I wouldn't do weekly because you're like thinking about the needs of what you're trying to serve. And so I think that question of what's the point and how can you do it the most effectively In general, having weekly events and something different every week is good. Our MSA does things usually in the in-person space once a week and something different every week, but it comes down to, like both Hanya and I have said, capacity. And what can you do well is much more than what can you do often. And so figuring out what you can serve in the most meaningful way, not necessarily the most consistent way. Well, actually, no, not in the most often way. Consistency is good. But yeah, what's the need that you're trying to serve? Does that format serve it? And then how can you do things the most well that you can, if that makes sense?
And would you like to go ahead?
I think Fatima summarized it well. The only other thing I would say is that, like we talked about, U of T being a commuter school versus Queens being a school where like the whole community lives around it. And so kind of like, I mean, one way you can ask is, would I be able to push out an event with the same, quality every week? Most of the times the answer will be no, and just think about it that way. But also there are things like Juma or Quran halaqas that you definitely can host every week. But yeah, I mean, the only risk I see with it is it's good to have an executive member there all the time to either run the event, even if you're having something run by someone else like an imam. So is that like a kind of commitment that you can get from your team? Is that something they signed up for in the first place? I would say for us, that's not the case. I don't expect my teammates to be, have their kumsa hats on 24/7. I know we said that it's different if you're present, but even, yeah, so I would not say it's the same case for my team. Other than that, I think Fatima summarized it well, so I'll just stop here.
Definitely. I agree with both those points. I mean, it really depends on the type of event. For smaller MSAs, my experience is sometimes if you have a weekly commitment, sometimes it gets too overwhelming. So it really depends on if it's an easy event to plan, like a game night or something where that doesn't require so much preparation, then definitely it's something you can encourage and have on a weekly basis to build consistency and to frequent people at your events. But again, it depends on the type of event it is. And of course, as Fatima mentioned, the intention. Moving on to the next question here. We discussed the idea of finances, through various resources, student union grants, sponsorships. How do you usually go about arranging a sponsor? Do you secure money for the event for the entire year, or event by event basis? So sponsorship, how do you guys approach that? And is it a yearly basis or is it event based? How is it in your experience?
Okay, I'll go ahead. So for us, it is event based. Sometimes sponsorships can be like gift cards. It can be directly like giving us money, or it can be products. And for different events, we need different things. If we can get just like a chunk of money, that would be great. But most people are not willing to just like sponsor an MSA as a whole, but you can appeal to them more by, describing what your event is and pick a sponsor that would want to sponsor that event. So sometimes when we have like a charity week, that's when we get a lot of sponsors, but we can get like Starbucks or any like local business in Kingston, but they might not be willing to sponsor an MSA for the whole year. So I would say it's relative, and most of our sponsors are smaller businesses. Like we don't get large organizations to sponsor us. And yeah, I think when you do it on an event by event basis, you might have more luck with that sponsor.
Yeah, I agree. I think for accountability and transparency's sake, having event by event makes a lot of sense. Also remembering that for the amana of spending the money of another organization who's put their trust in you, you want to make sure that you're very transparent about what you're spending on what. So on my train of plugging MAC things for Islam Awareness Week, we reached out to MAC and we said, this is what we're planning. This is exactly how it would look. Would you be willing to support us in this endeavor? And they said absolutely. And so we broke down exactly what that would look like. And I think especially in the pandemic year where a lot of organizations are looking to support where Muslim work was being done, where there were a lot of groups that weren't able to continue offering programming, that unity of reaching out and saying, how can we work together, pool our resources really helped. So yeah, I would say event by event makes a lot of sense. And when you do reach out to sponsorships, being as transparent and clear as possible about how is this going to benefit you? How would this benefit us? How is this going to benefit the community? And being really transparent with that is important for sure.
So that does conclude our session. If anybody has any last questions, we'll give it a minute or so. And Fatima and Hanya, if you guys want to add any other points, anything that you feel that you didn't get to touch on, or any outstanding sort of comments, please feel free to share them now, inshallah.
I would say thank you to everybody who's here. I'll put my MSA email in the chat if you have any other questions, or I'd love to pick so many of your brains. I'm seeing familiar names on the screen. This leadership conference really is about talking to one another, and so it feels weird to be answering other MSA leaders' questions, and I have lots of questions for all of you, so I'm going to put my email in the chat. But yeah, thank you so much for having me and for attending today.
Just a quick thing before I say thank you. Maybe if we stop the recording.